Sort of like opening Pandora's box. You don't know what else is going to come from it.
Major movement could be on the way in the case of disgraced rapper P. Diddy, as some reports are circulating that a grand jury of accusers is now being assembled.
The grand jury can then look at the totality of what's been presented and decide if there's enough for charges to be filed.
So, what's next for the federal investigation?
So the feds are going to be looking for any charges that could be substantiated within the last few years. I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, they'd be looking to see if there's criminal activity that they could link together.
And what's going on with Diddy's defense?
I'm sure that Diddy's legal team is well aware of these proceedings. They will not know exactly which witnesses are coming and when, but they are aware generally that this is ongoing.
Plus, what sort of timeline are we looking at for an indictment to come down?
We're very much in this kind of holding pattern in terms of legal observation because we're not quite sure which way this is going to go.
It's hard to believe that after months of reporting on some pretty serious allegations against P. Diddy, that's all there is, allegations. No criminal charges have been filed against the rapper turned entrepreneur, but there have been an array of accusers who allege a pattern of abuse over multiple decades. One thing we know for certain, there were federal raids on 2 of Diddy's homes in Miami and California back in March. I sat down with former prosecutor Melba Pearson to ask about this investigation and what's next for the case altogether. And I know there are a lot of unanswered questions here, but if we're just kind of hypothesizing, how long do we think that this federal investigation could have been ongoing?
I think that this has been going on since probably around the time that Lil Rod filed his lawsuit. That was the first shot across the bow. That was the first introduction that the feds had to, wait a minute, there might be something not kosher in Diddy land. And so as a result of reading the lawsuit, all the allegations, of course, they're seeing what happened in terms of the Cassie Ventura case with her filing her lawsuit and the practically immediate settling of the case. That is definitely a signal to a lot of people in the criminal justice world that are watching that there's smoke and there's likely fire here. And then the Lil Rod revelations built on what Cassie Ventura said in her lawsuit, and it corroborated a lot of what she said. And now, as a result of Lil Rod filing his lawsuit, more women have come forward discussing the fact that they were abused and brutalized by Diddy or other members of his family, including his sons. So with all of that evidence in some ways coming forward, or these allegations coming forward, excuse me, it's not quite evidence yet, but it's allegations, the feds then saw, okay, we really need to investigate this and take a fine tooth comb approach in looking at all of Diddy's dealings to figure out where there could be criminal charges. Because remember, the issue is statute of limitations. So a lot of the things that were discussed in Cassie's lawsuit as well in Lil Rod's lawsuit happened years ago. We're talking a decade or more, and there is a amount of time by law that a prosecutor has to file charges against someone, with the only exception being homicide or like a child sexual assault type situation. And that doesn't seem to apply here. So the feds are going to be looking for any charges that could be substantiated within the last few years. I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, they'd be looking to see if there's criminal activity that they could link together. So I think that this is going to be a bit ongoing. I feel like it'll probably be a couple more months. They're going to do a number of grand jury hearings. And so at that point, the grand jury can then look at the totality of what's been presented and decide if there's enough for charges to be filed.
The first accusations against Diddy came last November when Cassandra Ventura, known publicly as the singer Cassie, filed suit against Diddy. She dated Diddy for many years and alleged that during that time, he physically and sexually assaulted her, took photos of this abuse, and even forced her to have sex with prostitutes. Cassie's lawsuit was settled outside of court just one day after it was brought on, but the damage was already done. It paved the way for at least 3 other lawsuits in November alone, filed by Joy Dickerson Neal, Liza Gardner, and a woman identifying herself only as Jane Doe. Joy Dickerson Neal alleges Diddy raped her in the 90s when she was a student at Syracuse University. She also alleges she's a victim of revenge porn because Diddy apparently recorded the rape and then passed around the videotape. Liza Gardner also says she was raped by Diddy in New York in the 90s. She says he also got physically violent with her, at one point strangling her to the point that she lost consciousness. Jane Doe's allegations bring us into the 21st century. She alleges that Diddy raped her in 2003 when she was only 17 years old. She says he flew her on a private plane from Michigan to his recording studio in New York. She even has photos of them together from this time. These women brought forth accusations in civil lawsuits last November, but the allegations continued into 2024, namely with Rodney Jones's bombshell lawsuit filed back in February. Known publicly as Lil Rod, Jones alleged Diddy sexually assaulted him when Lil Rod worked on Diddy's Love album as a producer. He also alleged Diddy is known as the kingpin in a sex, drug, and gun trafficking empire. The lawsuits kept coming though, and in April, Diddy was listed on a lawsuit that alleged his son, Christian Combs, sexually assaulted a bartender on a yacht. Just last month, Diddy faced 2 new civil lawsuits filed by Crystal McKinney and April Lampros. Both women alleged Diddy sexually assaulted them in New York. All this brings us to news of a possible grand jury involving some of these plaintiffs. We're starting to get rumblings that some of these accusers or survivors are speaking with federal investigators and that they also could testify in front of a grand jury. So for people who don't know the background about that, what could that look like?
So, what a grand jury does is that they're brought together, they're random people from the community. They're selected based on the type of case. Obviously, if you have some sort of bias or conflict of interest. So, for instance, if you're, heaven forbid, a child sexual assault survivor, you're probably not going to be the best grand juror for this type of case, right? So, they do ask you a little bit of questions about your background to make sure that you're right to serve on that particular case. But the grand jury then is going to listen to all of the testimony that would be coming from these various parties. So, the feds, the U.S. Attorney's Office, or whichever agency that's going to be taking the lead on this, will be sending out subpoenas to various people that have been mentioned in each of these lawsuits. And then once those people come forward and provide testimony in terms of what they saw, what they experienced, what they heard, then from that batch of testimony, more names can come forward, right? Because these folks could say, listen, I was here and I saw Sierra at the party and I saw, Nick at the party. All right. Well, then the grand jury will then need to hear from Sierra and Nick in terms of what they heard, what they saw. And then there might be more people coming forward as a result of not only the publicity, but also from more of that testimony. More names can come forward, and then the grand jury will need to hear from them as well. So it's a bit of an iterative process. So we can't say that it's going to be over in a week or two because we never know. It's sort of like opening Pandora's box. You don't know what else is going to come from it.
Something I do know about grand juries is that they are kept secretive. So this cannot be publicized via video or the press isn't allowed inside. But is this something that Diddy's team would have a heads up on?
They would have a heads up in terms of if there's anything where they need to maybe present some evidence, maybe the grand jury, Diddy could be subpoenaed to appear in front of the grand jury. Now, will he want to testify? Different story, because again, this is a proceeding that even though it is not being broadcast, there will be a court reporter and the proceedings will be taken down. So this is going to be a statement that could potentially be used against him in the future. So he'll probably not want to testify. But I'm sure that Diddy's legal team is well aware of these proceedings. They will not know exactly which witnesses are coming and when, but they are aware generally that this is ongoing.
Let's pause this P. Diddy story for a quick second to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime news package. It's stories like this that remind you never know what's going to happen, and the world is an unpredictable place. So when you're hurt, it can be confusing, it can be scary, and you don't really know where to turn. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. You can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less on your phone and find out if you have a case. And if you do, your injury could be worth millions. In the past couple of months, they've gotten verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, and $6.8 million in New York. Also, they have over 1,000 lawyers, so you know you'll be in good hands. So if you're injured, you can start by easily submitting a claim at www.forthepeople.com/LCnews or by dialing #law. That's #529 on your phone. Now, back to our story. If these accusers are preparing to speak with a grand jury, where does that put us in terms of the federal investigation?
So, in terms of a timeline, we're still a few months out. We're not anywhere close to charges being filed because, again, as this process continues and the U.S. Attorney's Office and the other federal agents involved in this case, as they start to hear from these different waves of witnesses, they may be taken down different pathways that they have to investigate. You never know what's going to come from someone's testimony. So you're going to have to follow up whatever leads that come forth from their testimony. And then based on that, you may go in a different direction. We may end up looking at a global investigation because suppose he's, and, again, just throwing out options. We don't know what's happening here, but he could be part of let's say if he's part of a global trafficking ring. Well, then now we're going to have to figure out who the other co-defendants are, where the different crimes may have occurred. Are there other victims in other countries? Are there other survivors in other countries? All of those things would have to be investigated. So we're very much in this kind of holding pattern in terms of legal observation because we're not quite sure which way this is going to go. But I am very confident that charges are going to be filed. The question is against, who on behalf of which survivor. So it'll be against Diddy, but on behalf of whom, what time frame, how many charges, and where these crimes occurred. Because again, we don't know the full scope of what has gone on in the past few decades in terms of Diddy's behavior and the way he's harmed other people.
There's been allegations that some of this harm was recorded on video, but we saw this firsthand last month when surveillance video was released showing Diddy physically assaulting Cassie Ventura. The unedited video is really graphic, so we've stopped it before things get too physical. This is the type of evidence that could come from grand jury proceedings, but Melba believes this specific surveillance video came from elsewhere.
I hesitate to say that it came out as a result of the grand jury proceedings. My gut instinct is that Diddy and his team had been paying, based on what we had heard from Little Rod as part of his lawsuit and other rumblings, we had heard that when an incident like that occurs, because this was not isolated, Diddy and his team would reach out to the security of whatever building, hotel, whatever the case may be, to get any footage that would show Diddy in a bad light. I have a funny feeling that they paid for the footage, but somebody kept a copy. I don't think this is necessarily, police investigation and the video got released as part of that. I think somebody had a copy and just finally was like, you know what? We know Cassie's telling the truth. I have this information. I've sat on it for so long because I didn't feel it was my business or whatever the case may be. But now whoever it is felt the need to leak it. That's what I think happened. I'm willing to be wrong, but that's where I think that video came from.
Regardless of where this video came from, its release led to Diddy speaking out for the first time since December 2023.
I was f***ed up. I hit rock bottom. But I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy, and go into rehab. Had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
So to be blunt, I saw that video as sheer unadulterated garbage. Because there's no justification for what he did. I mean, he literally beat her mercilessly in the hallway of a hotel. He dragged her. I mean, there's no apology video that can cover it. Oh, I was in a dark place. Clearly, obviously, but that is not a way to make it up to Cassie. That is not truly taking responsibility for your actions. And he took the tact of basically trying to disparage her and say that this must be about money and lies, all of this back when the case started to first we start to hear those rumblings, and now he's got to take an about face and be like, oh no, actually no, it's not lies, it's true. Yeah, kind of. No, I don't buy it. I think it was just an attempt to, number one, try to save his image from a professional standpoint because he does not want to have endorsements or deals that he's working on be dropped or for people to walk away from him. But secondly, he's probably trying to put something out there in terms of knowing that this investigation is ongoing, knowing that charges may be coming sooner rather than later, and maybe trying to get a jump to rehabilitate his image in the hopes of whatever jury that eventually hears the case may think maybe a little more kindly of him. Well, at least he apologized, right? I don't see that as going to be effective PR, but that could be his motivation for doing that video. Certainly not out of true sorrow for what he did. I don't see that.
But where there's one video, there could be more, and Melba believes the search for more evidence could lead to more federal raids of Diddy's properties.
As more information comes to light, the feds are going to have to follow the trail wherever it leads. And so if that means that they have to search somebody else's home, it could be the home of one of his sons. It could be an ex-girlfriend's home. It could be a fellow producer. You never quite know where the evidence may lead you. So they're just going to have to follow it wherever it goes. And I do not cross off the list the option of more raids coming. And I almost would expect more raids to come.
If we're going back to the federal investigation, something that I know about the feds, or at least I've heard, is that they want an airtight case. They want to make sure that when they're coming forward with these indictments, these charges, that they know that they're going to win. So they have several people who have come forward with these pretty serious accusations, but that could be circumstantial evidence. He said, she said. What sort of additional evidence would they want to make sure they have their case locked in? I know it's been a while, so likely not DNA, but are there other things that the feds could be searching for?
Absolutely. I firmly believe that when they were searching in Miami and Los Angeles, they were looking for surveillance video because he was someone who was well known to have multiple cameras throughout his house. So trying to find that footage, trying to locate anything that might be on a laptop, might be on a phone. Maybe he had an old cell phone laying around that had some video on it that he never uploaded to the cloud. There could be any permutation of ways that that information could be found, but they're looking for that being able to substantiate what the survivor said. If they said on January 3rd, 2005, there was a party and this is what happened to me. Well, let's see if we can find footage showing that there was a party, showing the survivor walking into the home, showing them entering the hotel that the party was being held, or whatever the case may be. So that way you're able to place the survivor at the scene of where the incident happened. So it'd be that sort of tactic that the feds are trying to take here, really trying to substantiate what the survivors are saying and making sure that it lines up with the evidence they have.
Because the investigation is ongoing, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, like what charges Diddy could ultimately face.
Again, sky's the limit on this one because there's the potential of human trafficking based on Cassie's allegations, where she said that he had forced her to go to different places, different locations, different states, and, perform horrible sex acts, right? So it could be human trafficking. It could be anything along the lines of if somebody's underage. Do we have a child sexual battery type charge that we're looking at? So again, there's a lot of options on the table. We're just going to have to see where the evidence takes us.
Let's say that these charges do come down and Diddy is arrested. What do you think that that would look like?
I think it could go any of a number of ways. The fact that he's a high profile celebrity, in all likelihood, I could see agents having communication with his defense team and them bringing him to the police department or the, whichever headquarters as appropriate for him to surrender. I don't necessarily see the traditional quote unquote perp walk where, they'll come to his house, put handcuffs on him and parade him in front of the media. I don't necessarily see that. If I was part of his legal team, I would look for ways to be able to surrender him so that way you can avoid the media circus. But there's still going to be a media circus no matter what once he's arrested. It's just a matter of trying to contain it. Right. So it's not happening all at his front door and more so focused on whether it's at arraignment or whether it's at the time that he's being released after being booked, something along those lines. So I could see that happening. And then, the legal process will proceed as normal. He will not likely be going to court very often. His legal counsel will be the one to stand in for him, which again is normal and permissible in criminal cases. I could see that trial could happen fairly quickly. There'll be a number of different status hearings throughout the pendency of the case, but I would say within 2 years or so, the case will get tried. One from arrest to trial will likely be about, I would guess, around 2 years.
Melba says it's only a matter of time before Diddy is indicted, but it's difficult to pin down when that could happen.
Yeah, I can't guess on that one because, again, we don't know what's going to come out of the grand jury hearings. And if we end up finding out that this is an Epstein type situation where we have different locations, because, again, keeping in mind, this is somebody who's extremely wealthy. This is not somebody who is, just going to be doing a couple things around town and you can easily track, follow their tracks. This is someone who gets on a private jet and goes to a private island somewhere. So we don't know the scope. This could have a global scope. We saw that with Epstein. So it is incredibly possible that this could be a long path to justice for the survivors who endured such horrible things. This is not going to be very quick in terms of charges being filed. I think it's coming soon. I think it's going to happen. I just don't think it's going to be a rapid process.
And while much of the focus has been on Diddy, Melba reminds us the importance of acknowledging the survivors that have come forward.
Again, it always comes back to, what I'm going to do. Again, we just have to center the survivors who have been carrying this for years. If you think about Cassie, she carried this for more than a decade. And it's hard for them to see this in the media day after day and to know that at some point they may have to sit in front of 12 strangers and talk about one of the worst experiences of their lives. So we definitely have to always keep them in our thoughts.
Just last month, we heard from Diddy himself on social media, but aside from that, we've only gotten a few statements from his legal representation. In regards to the federal raids, Diddy's team released a statement calling it a, quote, gross overuse of military-level force, saying there's no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated. In response to Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's team says in part, quote, his reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. We'll continue to follow all the developments in this case and bring you the latest information here on our YouTube page. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.